Hopefully in a few minutes.
We do too.
All right. Okay, yeah. Are you going to try? Are you talking about
and I am the Deputy Director of the South Carolina chapter of NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. Thank you all for being here. We are here today to help facilitate the conversation about changing South Carolina's laws around cannabis. While we have seen more conversation than ever this legislative session, the aspect of decriminalization has long been ignored. Unfortunately, there are consequences to this willing silence, and the voices of those who are truly affected by cannabis criminalization are confined by stigma. Behind me stands a group of citizens who have experience, both first and second hand, with negative consequences of cannabis criminalization, be it through their work or their personal lives. Their stories are unique to them, but similar versions are told by countless others behind closed doors. It's time we start speaking up. I would first like to introduce our director, Scott Weldon, to share his thoughts.
Thank you, Kristen. Welcome, everyone. My name is Scott Weldon, and I am representing South Carolina chapter of the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. I'm here to address today to address the need for harm reduction through cannabis decriminalization in South Carolina, and I mentioned several bills that would start to address this need. I'd like to begin by mentioning the fact that the word decriminalization is a misnomer. It is not at all an accurate word for what decriminalization legislation attempts to do. The proposed decriminalization bills do not look to cease treating cannabis possession as a criminal offense. They only seek to reduce the penalties for that offense. A more accurate word would be depenalization, which means ceasing to apply penalties criminally or administratively for certain offenses. There are currently 3 bills in the House and 1 in the Senate that address reducing penalties for misdemeanor cannabis possession to a civil fine. There is also 1 bill in the House that's looking to legalize simple possession for honorably discharged veterans that have been diagnosed with PTSD. None of these bills are the no fine, no time, no court cost depenalization that South Carolina would prefer, but they are looking to bring cannabis penalties more in line with what our communities want. For reference, those bills are H3228, sponsored by Representative Henderson Mayers, H3571, sponsored by Representative Thigpen, H3672, sponsored by Representative Hart, and S335, sponsored by Senator McLeod. I'd also like to briefly mention House Bill H4610, sponsored by Representative Tedder, which is a bill to provide that the scent of hemp alone does not provide law enforcement with reasonable suspicion or probable cause to support a stop, search, seizure, or arrest. The harms that come from the penalties of simple cannabis possession arrest are far greater than the harm that could come from the plant itself. Arrest, conviction, fines, imprisonment are only the beginning. There's a good chance that you will be required to submit to a series of urine testing at your expense. You may also be required to participate in addiction counseling, again, at your expense. If you are employed at the time of your arrest, you could lose your job. A student, you could be suspended or even expelled. In the military, not anymore. If you test positive for cannabinoid metabolites from broad-spectrum CBD and you are a pregnant mom, you could be charged with child abuse and risk losing your children. Note that testing for cannabinoid metabolites does not in any way indicate impairment or cannabis metabolites can store in the system in the fatty acids, fats of your system for 30 days. When people are arrested for possession, even tiny amounts of marijuana, it can have dire collateral consequences that affect their eligibility for public housing and student financial aid, employment opportunities, child custody determinations, and immigration status. Then there's the story of Nick Stimson, a South Carolina boy who found relief for his bipolar depression when he consumed cannabis. But when he got his first charge for possession at age 14, it sent them on a course to find some relief through alternative substances that would not show up on a drug test or would clear the system quickly. But at age 16, he was caught with 5 grams of cannabis, for which he was given probation and frequent drug testing, increasing his resolve to find relief without facing probation violations. Since he couldn't have cannabis in his system, Nick experimented with inhaling different household chemicals and would huff computer duster spray, which ultimately caused his death. You don't need to be arrested to feel the harms caused by cannabis prohibition either. This same type of scenario could very well play out in South Carolina schools that are implementing or looking to implement random drug testing for students. Our kids aren't dumb. They know cannabis stores in their system for up to 30 days. So oftentimes these kids will seek out more dangerous substances that they know will clear their system in 12 to 48 hours. Do you really want to risk that happening? Cannabis consumers are also discriminated against in the job market. Pre-employment cannabis testing does not in any way indicate impairment or indicate potential poor work performance. Cannabis consumption is basically harmless. Cannabis prohibition is not. So what's NORML South Carolina going to do next? Well, moving forward, we'll begin collecting more of these stories to be able to share the harms of cannabis prohibition with our legislators and voters. We'll also be using facts to smoke out the propaganda. And what I mean by facts are NORML's fact sheets, which we have here in front of us flanking the podium. I'm going to take just a couple of moments to go over them with you, mention briefly a couple of the bullet points, but please visit normal.org/marijuana/fact-sheets to be able to access the live links that are embedded in these documents. First, I'd like to point out our fact sheet on the top over here to my right is the marijuana regulation, impact on health, safety, and economy. This one I will mention the bullet points on because they cover a wide range of issues. First bullet point, the enactment of adult use cannabis regulation is not associated with upticks in marijuana use by adolescents. The establishment of cannabis retailers is not associated with upticks in criminal activity. Neither medical use nor adult use legislation is associated with adverse effects on traffic safety. Marijuana regulation is not associated with adverse effects on workplace performance or safety. Marijuana is associated with declining alcohol consumption, and marijuana regulation is associated with increased tax revenue and job creation. One of our other fact sheets next to it talks about marijuana regulation and teen use. We'll touch briefly on that later. Next one over here is cannabis relationships between marijuana and opioids. Again, I'll touch on that on another bullet point down the line. Last one on our top row, marijuana regulation and crime rates. We'll kind of run through them quickly. Societal impacts on cannabis dispensary and retailers, marijuana legislation and impact on the workplace, marijuana and veterans issues, which we'll be hearing more about shortly from one of our other speakers, marijuana disparity and racial disparity, which again we'll be hearing a little bit more on shortly. Marijuana and psychomotor performance. I will briefly mention that because I mentioned before, they show very little or no impact on safety. And also marijuana exposure and cognitive performance. They claim there's very little or no significant effects on cognitive performance. Marijuana use and childhood outcomes, what happens if a mom happens to consume. And my favorite bit of propaganda, marijuana and the gateway theory, which I will mention the one bullet point, which touches base on a couple of others. In jurisdictions where marijuana is legally accessible, adults typically report decreasing their use of controlled substances. In this sense, marijuana appears to be more potentially an exit drug rather than the alleged gateway drug. Last three on our list here, we'll talk about TH potency concerns. Are stronger products more problematic? Also, if you want to know NORML's positions on the core attributes for adult access regulations. And last but not least, if you'd like to know our opinions on the medical bills, there are core attributes of patient-centric medical cannabis regulatory programs as well. With that, I'd like to just close by saying that I thank you for listening to us and our concerns, and I look forward to working with our communities to bring harm reduction through cannabis decriminalization to South Carolina.
Our next speaker is Postema, again with South Carolina NORML.
Good morning, everybody. You out there? Good morning. You back here? All right. My name is Postema, and I am the Secretary for the South Carolina chapter of NORML. And it's wonderful to see your faces today. A quick snapshot of me. I was raised by two soldiers who taught me that integrity is everything and to always maintain the standard. That phrase has lived with me my entire life. It has influenced every aspect of my life. Maintain the standard. It means that you value the integrity of the expectation. As I have continued to grow, I have learned that sometimes it is valuable to reassess the standard that you're maintaining. In fact, that's why I am here today. I need South Carolina to reassess the standard as it relates to our cannabis laws. Research paints a disturbing picture of what it means to live with South Carolina marijuana laws, specifically for Black people. According to the ACLU's A Tale of Two Countries report, Black people are 3.5 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana possession than their white counterparts. Which is interesting because Black and white people consume similar amounts of cannabis. That's right. If you dig more into the arrest rate of Black people, Black males are arrested the most. I find that this is due to our current standard in how we enforce our marijuana laws. Well, it's time to reassess the standard. Echoing the findings of the ACLU's report, we see that 7 South Carolina counties sit on the top 20 counties for marijuana possession arrest rates. Black people are being disproportionately affected by South Carolina's marijuana laws, and it's time that we realistically look at how we are destroying communities through these laws.
That's right.
How can you even begin to build the foundation of marijuana law reformation without acknowledging the wrongs committed towards the people? I am calling for a new standard. If your idea of cannabis reformation does not include rectifying the negative impact that marijuana laws have pushed on our communities, especially the black community, then rethink your idea. I am calling for a new standard. If expungement and justice for underrepresented persons that are overly represented in our jail and prison systems isn't in your plans when we speak of legalization, then I invite you to go back to the drawing board. I am calling for a new standard.
Yes.
If you are not creatively thinking of how funds from cannabis can be integrated into communities that have carried the worst burden from these laws, then take time to reignite your imagination. I am calling for a new standard.
Yes.
Today I stand here with people who see the value in legalization. I speak to our legislatures and law enforcement. When it comes to marijuana laws, de-emphasizing marijuana is okay. Decriminalization of marijuana is good. Legalization with proper regulation and true community alignment is best.
Yeah.
In closing, I ask that you, 1, digest this information, 2, reassess the situation, and 3, push for legalization that coincides with our communities. In doing this, we begin to maintain the new standard.
Yes.
Thank you for your ear.
Woo!
Thank you, Vaughn, for your thoughts. Up next, we have former Congressman Joe Cunningham.
Woo! Come on, Joe. Tell them like it is.
Thank you all. South Carolina's Governor McMaster is living in the past. And our state is in the past too because we have failed leadership. If Governor McMaster supported this medical marijuana bill, it would pass out of the Senate and the House with no problems whatsoever. But because he's part of the past, he wants to keep South Carolina in the past as well. Look, 90% of people approve of medical marijuana. This is a slam dunk issue. This isn't even a question. The fact that we all have to be here today is an insult to the intelligence of South Carolinians. It's disturbing and it's appalling. The fact that we have folks who need medical help right now.
Yes.
And they can't get it because of politicians like Governor McMaster. I served on the Veterans Affairs Committee in Congress. And I can tell you story after story after story. I can tell you about a Marine who lost a limb in Iraq from a roadside bomb. He came up to me and said, I can't sleep at night because of my PTSD, because every night when I lay my head down on the pillow, I relive that explosion. And you know what? The only thing that allows me to close my eyes and get some rest is using marijuana. That's it.
Support our veterans.
I talked to another veteran who came back from overseas, again with PTSD and other injuries. And he went to the doctor, and the doctor just said, here's some opioids. Go fill this prescription. And he told me, he said, I don't want to fill a prescription. I don't want to become another statistic. I want something safer. Something like medical marijuana, but he cannot get it in South Carolina because we have leadership from the past right now. We have a career politician who's been in politics for 40 years and has become disconnected with the voters right here in South Carolina. I mean, think about it. We're getting lapped by Mississippi and Alabama. Think about that, folks. Those states have already passed medical marijuana bills. You know, there are people in Mississippi who are saying, well, thank God for South Carolina. Otherwise, we'd be last in this. That's a joke, and it's an insult to South Carolinians everywhere. Ladies and gentlemen, this shouldn't even be an issue right now. This should not even be up for debate. Because this is about supporting our veterans. We have a lot of politicians who want to say support our troops, support our veterans, but when they come home from serving our country and they come home with injuries, some of which are not visible, the fact that we have politicians that would deny them that relief and then get in front of microphones and talk about how they support the troops and how they support the veterans is insulting. And it's what people hate about politics. And just in the last 2 days, I've talked to 2 family members who've lost loved ones to cancer. And we talked about the ability of medical marijuana to help ease the pain and help that transition. And this is about compassion. This is about providing relief to those who need it most. This is about looking after our neighbors and our loved ones. But because our politicians have become so disconnected from the people that they serve, we're here today fighting for them. And we're here today standing for them. And I applaud Senator Tom Davis. And I tell you, the Republican Party would be better served if they had more Tom Davises in their party.
Yeah.
We appreciate the stand he's taken and the void in leadership that he has stepped into because of the absence of Governor McMaster and his failed policies. I yield back.
Yeah.
Up next, we have Helen Brenna with ACLU, South Carolina.
Okay, so at the ACLU, we're a nonpartisan organization, and our priority is fighting for the civil rights and the civil liberties of all. And these are nonpartisan issues. This is simply about protecting all South Carolinians. The criminalization of marijuana under the guise of maintaining public safety has been an abject failure in reducing harm in our communities and protecting our most vulnerable South Carolinians. To the contrary, the enforcement of marijuana laws generates some of South Carolina's most staggering disparities in arrests and citations. Like in Charleston, where since 2015 more arrests have been made for marijuana possessions than all violent offenses combined. Meaning, Charleston Police Department spent most of its resources and energy criminalizing low-level offenses like marijuana possession. My work is rooted in Charleston, where I'm a member of the People's Budget Coalition, a group of community leaders, members of nonprofit sectors, grassroots organizations, and a range of experts in local Charleston issues. Last fall, we published a report titled Building a Safe and Just Charleston, from eliminating racist policing to investing in life-affirming services. Our report analyzed the staggering disparities in CPD arrests and citations, utilizing data from CPD's open data portal. Our report found that CPD still continues to spend the majority of its time citing and arresting people for low-level offenses like marijuana possession, with staggering racial disparities. Black people make up 22% of Charleston's population, and we know marijuana usage is roughly equal around all demographics. Yet between January 2020 and June 2021, Black South Carolinians made up about 71% of all marijuana possession arrests. That broke down to 81.7% of all sales arrests, 71.3% of all marijuana possessions arrests. Black people were cited at almost 10 times the rate of white people for marijuana possession. These alarming disparities remain functionally unchanged, and in some categories have only increased, highlighting the urgent need to reimagine public safety in South Carolina immediately. In Charleston and across South Carolina, spending on law enforcement dramatically outpaces that of community services such as housing, comprehensive health, reasonable and reliable transportation, affordable childcare and youth programs, and other institutions that help build stable, safe, and healthy communities. It's time to align our approach to public safety in South Carolina to prioritize services that enhance life-affirming services to support all South Carolinians, especially our most vulnerable. Our position at ACLU is simple. Ending the enforcement of marijuana possession and distribution is good. Not replacing marijuana prohibition with systems of fines and fees and arrests is better. Legalizing marijuana use and possession is best. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen, for your thoughts. Up next, we have Shane Bush.
Good morning. My name's Shane Bush, and I'm a journeyman iron worker by trade, a first-generation cannabis farmer, founder of Bush's Little Green Acres, and cannabis activist, representing Charleston, South Carolina, and the surrounding areas. I want to say that I'm in full support of Bill S-150 that Senator Tom Davis and his constituents have been working on for 7 years. But that's not why I'm here today. I'm here on behalf of the men, women, and children of the underclass and communities of color whose lives have been negatively impacted by cannabis prohibition. I'm here in our state capitol, standing with NORML, South Carolina, to meet and talk with our local senators and legislators about harm reduction and depenalization. Now that more than, or almost half of America has medical or recreational cannabis passed at a state level, and both the Democratic and Republican parties have introduced bills that would legalize cannabis federally, it's only a matter of time before America brings an end to cannabis prohibition. We're here today to build relationships, educate through the facts, and be a voice for the voiceless. We do not expect this to happen overnight, but it is time to have the necessary conversations. Thank you for allowing me an opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Shane. Up next, we have Michael Harvey.
Mr. Harvey.
Good morning. My name is Mike Harvey. I'm a retired Lieutenant Colonel, Army Nurse Corps officer, and a registered nurse. Typically, I talk from the veteran standpoint. However, today I'm coming to you from the registered nurse point of view. Let's talk about harm reduction. In the medical community, harm reduction is geared at utilizing medications with fewer adverse effects than the current medications being utilized or new medications coming on the market. All medications have potentials for adverse side effects, from aspirin to opiates. Each carries with it its list of potential and confirmed adverse effects. This is not true with cannabis. However, as current research shows, the adverse effects of cannabis are less than most other drugs. Thus, it would fit into the harm reduction model. In evaluating the CDC statistics for 2018, one can pull the following information on overdose deaths by commonly prescribed medications in the treatment of chronic pain, anxiety, and depression. For instance, antidepressants in 2018 took the lives of 5,064 patients. Benzodiazepines took the lives of 10,724. Prescription opiates, just the prescriptions, 14,975 people overdosed. If you add the other synthetic opiates in there, it tops 31,000. Also, while reviewing the CDC website, on their alcohol and public health page, the following annotation is made. Excessive alcohol use is responsible for more than 95,000 deaths in the United States each year, or 261 deaths per day. Or more simple terms, it's 10.9 deaths per hour related to alcohol. There is no CDC data for drug overdose deaths associated with cannabis. If you look at the DEA website, you'll see that under the marijuana drug facts, you will get the following information, and I quote, "No deaths from overdose of marijuana have been reported." Step on over to the National Institute of Drug Abuse and look up the marijuana research report, and the following statement is annotated. There are generally no reports of people fatally overdosing, dying on marijuana alone. That comes from the Marijuana Research Report, July 2020. I ask you please use the National Institute of Drug Abuse website to help gather the needed information and make rational decisions on cannabis. Don't rely on the information from Facebook, or worse, South Carolina law enforcement. Each morning, I start my day off with cannabis. Yes, I use cannabis. However, this cannabis is federally legal based on the 2018 Farm Bill, as long as it contains less than 0.3% THC. You can buy it online. You can get it at multiple stores in your neighborhood and at some local pharmacies. As a registered nurse, due to the fear and stigma brought on by marijuana, cannabis, I will not be able to practice nursing at the bedside because of that fear, even though this is a federally legal product. It's also cut my military career a little short. Based on THC content, it is possible for a soldier, Marine, Airman, any of the branches to have a hot urinalysis and they lose their military career. We have been sold a bill of goods by our government and law enforcement. They are telling us that cannabis is the most dangerous drug out there, the devil's lettuce, and use of words that are intended to draw fear as they continue to use the word marijuana, weed, and pot. The fear of cannabis is so great that our country would rather have Americans take their lives or suffer in pain versus the utilization of a drug that has proven effective in the treatment of specific medical conditions. The fear of cannabis has resulted in information on cannabis to only hinge on one side, and that's the negative aspects. And many of these points of view are so far left field. A case in point, we are told that there has never been a prescription for federally legal cannabis available to Americans. This is quite wrong, actually. In the mid to late 70s, Robert Randall sued the U.S. government and won, defending his right to utilize cannabis to treat his glaucoma. This resulted in a new program based on the Independent New Drug Program, and for the next 25 years, Robert Randall received one of these tins every month, which came from Mississippi, University of Mississippi, under the National Institute of Drug Abuse program. It was then shipped to Research Triangle, I'm assuming because that's where all the cigarette manufacturers are, to be rolled into cigarettes, and then mailed with a pharmacy script to the patient. Robert Randall had this for 25 years. There are another 29 to 30 other patients in the same category. So obviously, you can have a medical drug program through the federal government. Quit listening to lies, please. As South Carolinians, we should be offered all available medical therapies, not limited to those therapies that have shown to have limited success and significant side effects. Let's quit locking up Americans for simple possession of cannabis being used to manage their health care. I ask the question, how does this plant carry any more risk of harm than our opiates, benzodiazepines, and even alcohol? As a registered nurse, I understand that the cannabis possession possesses certain adverse effects that can be of issue to some patients. But looking at the harm reduction model, I feel strongly that cannabis can be used safely without the loss of life caused by other drugs. Thank you for your time. Please support the decriminalization of cannabis. This plant has a lot to offer residents of South Carolina, from medicine to durable goods. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Finally, I would like to introduce Cody Coleman.
All right. Good morning, everybody. My name is Cody Coleman. I'm a Marine veteran and a cannabis advocate. This isn't the first time I've been speaking out our state's capital about the benefits of cannabis. Actually, last week, today, a week ago, I was actually up here very flustered with a tear to my eyes talking about the loss of my fellow Marines to suicide due to alcohol and opioid overdose. I'm not here representing any groups or interests. I'm just a South Carolinian that isn't scared to stand up and speak for others that can't or won't. but they're worried that they'll be judged for their beliefs. I have people that reach out to me about how they can help and contact their legislators, but they're afraid to put their name on the letter for fear that someone will show up to their door. And that's where the problem starts. Why should South Carolinians be afraid to speak up about cannabis? Because there's a negative stigma that started 4 generations ago. A stigma starting with calling cannabis marijuana to make it sound exotic. A stigma where up to 65 South Carolinians are arrested every day for possession, costing us an average of $20,000 a year for each inmate, for a plant that's been proven medically for its value and non-violent. I've spoke with veterans and their PTSD before for the last 2 weeks, but there are many types of PTSD that affects everyday people like you and I. Whether it can range from the horrors of combat to first responders recovering gruesome remains of people from car accidents, being the victim of violence, or even being arrested for the possession of a small amount of a harmless plant that helps alleviate the stress of everyday life. I have a quote from a valued Charlestonian, Bill Murray, you might have heard of him, and I think we can all agree with his quote. I find it quite ironic that the most dangerous thing about cannabis is getting caught with it. It's time to end this unnecessary and unjust prohibition on cannabis. It's time that the benefits of cannabis can turn post-traumatic stress into post-traumatic growth. Thank you, and I hope to see everyone here. And I want to stay as the last speaker, so thank you for everyone showing up. And you want to take it over from here? All right, thank you.
So that concludes our conference for today. If you would like to learn more, please join us at SCNORML, that's SCNORML.org. I would like to thank all of our speakers and everyone for showing up. We're excited to get things moving.